Great. Okay. Hey, welcome everybody to a really exciting webinar we have that we're calling Transforming Maritime Logistics. It's going to be a conversation between me, Ryan Petersen. I'm the founder and CEO of Flexport, and the CEO of Ocean Network Express, better known as ONE. That's Jeremy Nixon. And so, yeah, as I mentioned, I'm Ryan, and we have a pretty exciting conversation today. But before I begin, a couple housekeeping items here. First off, any technical issues you may have, you can message us through the help chat on the right sidebar, and the Flexport team will help you out. And then you see two tabs at the top of your screen. The first one lets you sign up for an upcoming webinar on March 18th. That's next week, where we're going to talk about our customs and trade advisory team is going to talk about the latest tariff changes. And honestly, they might not even know what they're going to talk about now. It would probably a lot's going to change between now and March 18th. So that team's been doing a great job trying to keep everybody up to speed on what's going on in the world of U.S. customs and sort of globally what's happening. We'll talk about probably a little bit of that today with Jeremy. And then the second tab there is a quick feedback survey for this webinar. We love reading your feedback. We learn from it. We want to hear from you. So please fill that out. Okay, now a legal note. My legal team makes me do this. Keep in mind that everything being provided here is general information purposes only, may not be suited to your particular business requirement. Okay. And with that, let's see if we can invite Jeremy here onto the stage with us. And welcome, Jeremy. Let's see. Yep. All right, cool. Hey, great to see you live from Singapore, I assume, right? I forgot to ask. I assume you're in Singapore right now, or are you traveling?
Yeah, no, Ryan, I'm actually in Singapore, and that's our global head office for ONE. But as you can see in the background, I've got a rather nice picture of Tacoma and Mount Washington, and always great to all these different geographical areas that Flexport and ONE and many of us in the industry are involved with.
So, and maybe that's a great place to start. I do think you guys have become one of the most well-known company amongst my friends who know nothing about shipping because of your beautiful magenta ships. But tell us a little bit about the history of ONE. I think it's a fascinating journey, and a little bit yourself too. But let's start with the company.
Yeah, I mean, from the company standpoint, I mean, ONE was formed in 2017 and went live in April 2018. And essentially, it's the consolidation of three different companies, three coming into one. So we called it ONE. And the three companies were the three Japanese legacy companies, these three big Japanese Kitetsu-type companies, K-Line, MOL, and MOSK, MOL. And they've been in the business for over 100 years. They're very big in shipping, Japanese shipping companies with a global reach. But they decided to carve out their container shipping operations and step back from being an operator individually and bring those assets into one single pool and to form ONE. And they just step back, and they're a shareholder now. So basically, those are the three guys that are the shareholders. And we have our global head office in Singapore. We run the company independently, but of course we are answerable to those three shareholders. But
I found that to be really cool. I mean, first off, it's just a fascinating, very hard business. Congratulations. I know it's been a while, so you don't think about it that much anymore, but very hard thing to do, to get three different companies to kind of merge and come together as one like that. And then also really interesting that you chose Singapore, I think, to represent, hey, we're going to be a big global company here, not just a Japanese company. I assume that there's some message in that. I know Singapore is probably a more important shipping hub for the world as well.
Yeah, I mean, historically, Japanese companies have done a lot of business in Japan, but particularly on the shipping logistics side, so many of those Japanese companies on the manufacturing and the retail side have moved offshore. And I think many of the Japanese logistics shipping companies followed those clients overshore and helped them out, set up, 30, 40 years ago. But I mean, our account base now is predominantly non-Japanese. As I like to say, we're transitioned from being a Japanese company that happens to be international to being now truly an international company that just so happens to be Japanese. And Singapore is a great location for us to do business, to have a hub here. So we've got a big logistics hub here with a joint venture with the PSA, but also it's been our global head office, and it's a very, very good, very business friendly, very easy to travel. You know the store, Ryan. You come through, you can hit the ground running, and so it's much more in tune with the overall context of our global business.
And can you tell us? I think people would love to hear your personal story. You've told me a little bit in the past when we chatted, but I just love to hear you grew, where you grew up and how you ended up working for a Japanese company and then getting tapped to go put this together.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a really impressive.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it's kind of a Brit working for a Japanese company living in Singapore. It may be more common in the future. I don't know, but it was certainly pretty rare. I would say 20, 30 years ago. But yeah, I very humbly started my life as a seafarer. I went to sea when I was 18 as a navigating trainee officer. I always loved the sea. Grew near the sea. Wasn't really sure about this college thing.
What was your first ship? What kind of ship was it?
Yeah, it was a general cargo vessel. So we had about 200 containers on deck, but everything else was break bulk. So it was sort of going through that phase of the industry changing. So I'm giving my age away, but that was back in 1978.
That's so cool.
So I did the seafaring thing, and then I was really interested to come ashore, like many of us do. It's a young person's game, and you need to think of, well, it's my career forever. I'm going to be like Captain Barnacle for the rest of my life. But I got all my qualifications, and I was a navigating officer on the ships. And then I went to university and I did maritime law and economics. And then from there, I went into the container terminal business. And then from there, I then joined P&O Containers at the time, which was the preeminent UK British container shipping company. Which is one of the early players in the container game after Sealand. So I joined them, and then through a period of a long career in the container shipping business, I worked for a number of different players. So P&O Ned Lloyd, then Maersk took out P&O Ned Lloyd, and then I moved to NYK, and then NYK moved into ONE. So I've seen this industry over the last 30, 40 years consolidate. I've been lucky enough to work with many great companies, many great people, many great customers, and to have lived obviously in Europe, but also lived in North America and lived in Asia. So I think, from our, the international dynamics of what Flexport does and what ONE does and our industry, this great industry we have, where we're kind of the servants of global trade, you kind of need to know your geography, and you kind of need to know different cultures and values and the ways that sourcing and production works.
It's one of the coolest things about this industry is like, I sometimes call it it's the circulatory system of the world economy, almost in a literal sense, but it's also just a backstage pass to how everything's happening and an opportunity to go learn about every culture and, different economies and where things are made and where they're sold and what's happening in the world. Yeah. I just think it's so fascinating. It's also just listening to you talk, and, we sometimes come in as a bit of an outsider myself. I mean, now I feel like I'm an insider because I've been in the container shipping business for almost 15 years, but it's still pretty short time period. But I come in with that outsider perspective. I still try to maintain that beginner's mind of challenging things and asking why things work. But sometimes I feel that, this industry's been a little slow to adapt and change with technology. But then when I hear someone, who's had your history in the business and think of all the changes that have happened, maybe I just need a longer perspective and recognize, like, wow, like you were had break bulk cargo and container shipping on the same boat and didn't have probably nearly the scale of the ports and the amount of change the industry has actually been through on it. If you take a longer term horizon, it's actually pretty impressive.
Yeah, I think the industry really has gone through a lot of change. I mean, a lot of people still think it's very kind of about the steel and the hardware, and the salty encrusted eyebrows of the the seafarer, all that kind of stuff, and that's still very, very important, of course. But just so many things have changed. I mean, the size of the ships and the technology now on the ships is in another world.
The turnaround times at the ports, the ability to load things and unload them.
Absolutely. And then the port infrastructure has improved in certain parts of the world. Not in every part of the world.
I definitely want to ask some questions about that when we get there. One thing I will call out, I always felt you have very beautiful, your website. It's one-line.com, if I'm not mistaken, has you have, if you're out there, go to their service maps, and it's always, they've done a great job of representing their different strings and where they call. I just was checking it out ahead of this interview. I noticed they've actually just pushed an even nicer update. I think they do one of the best jobs out there in the industry. So you start to adopt, you're seeing more and more great companies starting to say, hey, it's not just the steel, it's not just the physical assets, but where's the digital coming? I think you guys are, I don't know. When I click through those maps, I go, man, what a cool business. Like, look at all the different places that you guys go and services. And then you must have some serious nerds deciding where these ships should be deployed and how do those networks get designed.
Yeah. And so, there's a lot of tech involved now, a lot of digitalization, a lot of AI. And frankly, to your point, we go back 25 years ago, our business was very analog, especially the way we interface with the customers. Today, we have 20,000 customers globally. And, old days, it was all about bills of lading and pieces of paper and very clunky analog type screens. And, the way that Flexport's also come into the logistics industry, the 3PL, the way you've just looked at it a different way and you've digitalized, just everything's gone digital and everything's become automated. I mean, the carriers are doing exactly the same thing. We're doing the same thing.
Yeah, we're seeing more and more the ability to. I mean, I think we basically want the same things. I mean, there is a world where you want higher prices and the customer wants lower prices. Okay, fine, that's always going to exist. But there's all these other things that both sides should be able to come together at and create win-wins. Actually, as a Japanese company, I think you guys have, or at least Japanese heritage, have some real advantage there. Like I've always been one of my favorite business philosophers. I probably have in his books here is W.E. Deming. Yeah. Who's been very influential in Japanese business culture. And like one of their core foundations is, hey, let's build long-term partnerships and try to reduce costs like across our partners' business and our business and say, how do we see the world through the other party's eyes and try to visualize, what can we do to reduce costs and eliminate waste?
Yeah, exactly. And, I think every industry and every culture has different ways of looking at things. But I think here in Asia, particularly in Japan, very, very strong focus on process management. Just that whole Kaizen, that whole Six Sigma, plan, do, check, act. And that's part of our philosophy. And just everything, why can't things be done better? And continuously challenging the current paradigm and saying, okay, we can improve on that. We can speed that up. We can do that. And I think, Flexport and ONE and a number of us in the container shipping industry are just trying to take the friction out of the whole process. How do we just make it much easier for the customer to be able to see what they've booked, where it's going, when it's going to arrive, and is there any exception management, and make that as seamless as possible. And we're doing that, as ONE and Flexport, you've done an amazing job as well doing that. And that's the holy grail, right? Just really simplify this and just make it flow and make it frictionless.
Yeah, and man, the harder we work, the more the world seems to conspire against us to. So we're definitely going to talk about that. I think the $1 billion, $1 trillion question on everybody's mind is the Red Sea. I know you're not going to be able to make any real predictions at this moment. There's a lot of uncertainty, but there have been all kinds of other barriers that keep throwing up here too. Obviously, tariffs. I want to get your take on these new fees on Chinese-made ships and get a sense of that. But before we go into those things, I want to coming back to that service map and like figuring out, okay, where do we deploy what ships are going to go on what strings? You sort of have this infinite problem to start. And I'm very, very curious, like at some point there's, especially as alliances have reconfigured this year, there's a moment to rethink things. And like, where do you start in that problem? Like, what's the first meeting? Is if you put a pin, like I definitely need to go between these ports and then start building around that, or where's the starting point?
Ryan, it all starts with the customer, right? For Flexport and with ONE, and it's a question of looking at the general demand for container services. So we have a lot of data, a lot of very good market intel, got a strategic marketing we do where we're looking at the container flows on not just continent to continent, but port pair to port pair, and you're looking at where are the denser flows and where are the lighter flows. And then you're looking at, working with your customers to try, obviously, to contract and work your customers' cargo volumes on those lanes. And then you look at basically the philosophy is I want to put the biggest ship possible on any port leg if I can.
Okay.
But of course, that's going to be dependent on, is there enough cargo for it? Is the port actually going to be able to accommodate the big ships, right? And is it economic over that distance to run big ships? Because you're looking at, big ships basically equals, more energy efficiency, lower slot cost. And that's been the holy grail of the container industry. If we go back, to 25 years ago, the average ship size was about 3,000 TU. Today, the average ship size is about 12,000 TU. As you know, we're running.
And that's the fleet average, not the average of new builds, right? That's just like the fleet average. So we're still factoring in some.
That's the size of the ships. So the technology has allowed the ships to get bigger and bigger, longer and longer, more and more efficient.
Is there an upward limit on that? Like that? There's an economic upward limit of how big the trade lane will manage and whether there enough demand between these two ports or whatever. But is there an upward limit in the physics that says, actually, a 50,000 container ship would be better theoretically, if I could get a deep enough port and enough demand to fill it?
Ryan, I'm always careful when I
Okay. We get to that. We'll get the naval architects to tell us.
but I think we probably are about there. I mean, there's 24,000 TU-size ships. They're 400 meters long. They're 58 meters wide.
Start to hit other bottlenecks in terms of being able to unload the thing on time. And
I mean, the ports, the terminals around the world don't really have berth lengths more than 400 meters, and then the cranes need to be able to lift up to 24 containers high on deck. So that we're hitting those limitations. And then there's draft. 18 meters and above it gets very rare, and so it's the depth of the water.
Yeah. Okay. So it's interesting.
And then it's productivity on the ports, right? You don't want to. The bigger the ship, the longer it stays. That doesn't make sense. You need the ports to be able to keep up the productivity. And one of the problems we have with a number of ports in the world, including in North America, is the ports don't work 24/7. The ship does. The ship comes in, and then it becomes a bottleneck, right? Because there's more. The ship.
It's kind of crazy. You have this multi-$100-million asset just sitting there. Because we don't have a night shift to go unload it. And
that's right. So the factories in Asia are working 24/7. The ships are coming 24/7. They come into the port system. The port system is not working 24/7.
Is that truly a United States or maybe North America problem? Or do we see port operations being 24/7 in many other parts of the world?
Yeah. So Europe and Asia is 24/7.
Interesting.
And North America, we have things which we call the hoot shifts and stuff like that, where we could, in theory, bring labor on in the middle of the night, but it has certain complexities around availability and cost. But
they just charge the contract requires you to pay a lot more for night shift, probably.
Yeah. But I think we what's happened generally with ports is they densified and automated, and that's obviously a sensitive subject in the US.
Yeah.
But we'll get there. We're working with the ILA. We're working with the ILW. But North America, we need to make America's ports great again.
Yes.
Because they are not as good as they are globally, right? So
I haven't gotten any professional coaching on this, so I don't know if it's bad for my career at Flexport to be critical of the lack of automation in the ports, but I just can't help myself. I just want to see it technology deployed, and it seems like an obvious thing that America should have efficient ports, and I've been frustrated by that. So hopefully, I mean, we just kind of did the ILA negotiation, so it's locked in. It is what it is for the next 6 years, but I'm optimistic in 2031 or something, that we could get a better deal for America, for the citizens of our country.
Yeah.
What so okay, tabling that for a second, I think the big question that I want is the elephant in the room is the Red Sea. And I know you don't have any particular insight into like what's going to happen situation on the ground with Yemen, and I wouldn't expect that. But I am kind of curious, like the dynamics of like the insurance companies have a really strong say. Maybe the charter, if you still charter some of the fleet, these owners don't really want to take risk. I've even heard customers themselves are like, hey, I don't want my cargo on a ship because I might get hit with general average if something happens to my ship. So what are some of the other dynamics here beyond that maybe people don't think about?
Yeah, so we had, it all started off back in December 2023 with the kidnapping of and hijacking of a car carrier, all the crew. And then from there, we saw multiple attacks on vessels. We saw fires. We even saw some ships.
Were any of those on your vessels?
No,
okay,
because the majority of the container shipping lines decided, as soon as we'd seen the initial attacks, to back off.
Yeah.
Because essentially these ships today, these container ships, they have their hull values are around about $200 million. And then they've got getting on north of $1 billion worth of freight and cargo.
For sure.
So they're big assets. And then, of course, we've got our crew. We've got 25 crew on board who, don't like getting shot.
No, I mean, if somebody shot a missile at our office, we would be going back to work from home for sure. So
Exactly. So, basically from January onwards, we started diverting away from Suez. And that has really continued in the container shipping sector. There are still some small ships still regionally going through, but very, very limited. And the simple reason is that, the Houthis have made it very clear to us that they're going to continue to shoot away, except, when we had the initial ceasefire. And the initial ceasefire came in, a couple of months back, and, been watching. and it's definitely calmed down in terms of the number of attacks. But there is no certainty that our ships will not be targeted. And in fact, in the last week, the Houthis have said, we're giving Israel 4 days' notice to start getting the aid back into Gaza. And if the aid is not back in there by that time, it's game on again. We will go after the international supply.
Oh, wow. Okay. I didn't see that. There's so much happening in the world of global shipping.
So the clock's turned back. And then, of course, we also have the new administration probably going to double down on Iran in terms of putting political pressure. And Houthis are a political extension of Iran.
Yeah. I mean, so maybe things either get a lot worse or a lot better. It's hard to imagine there's that much status quo, although the status quo is kind of bad. We're not able to use the main shipping corridor of the world as the Red Sea.
But for the US, I think it's not too bad because, like today we offer 15 services a week as ONE with the Premier Alliance, of which only 2 of those services would normally go through Suez. And
now but of course, people are worried about just interested in seeing that return, even if they don't ship anything through there. We're expecting more capacity, which should bring down prices and increase reliability. That's what people want. But I think one thing that people haven't thought about, as eventually, presumably, civilization prevails here, and we're eventually able, as humanity, to use the Suez Canal again and use the Red Sea. That when that happens, there's going to be a period where stuff might actually get much worse because you're going to have so much congestion in the ports where ships are arriving from around the Cape and coming through the Suez at the same time, and European ports just get bottlenecked and backed up. I'm assuming there's plans that will start to come in terms of phasing it in or something. But man, it sounds like a really hard problem to solve.
It is, and there's it's particularly significant in the Asia-Europe trade, where we have literally hundreds of ships at the moment routing around the Cape of Good Hope. And so the whole supply chain has adapted to that. Customers have adapted to that. Our schedules have adapted to that. And then our berthing windows have adapted to that. And now, if we throw the switch, we've got to be confident when we throw the switch that we go to a long-term structural new setup. We can't flop backwards and forwards. And what will happen is in the initial 3 months, as you point out, it will actually get more challenging on the congestion because the ships coming the long way around, you have a lot of ships now diverting through the shorter way, and the 2 are going to meet.
Yeah.
2 sets of ships are going to meet in Europe. They're going to meet in Southeast Asia, North Asia. And so that is going to put more compounding bottlenecks. So that's why, we want to be certain that we've got stability before we throw the switch, because it will be a very significant and costly exercise to do.
Yeah, I need to get our teams doing some good data modeling on that, about what that congestion would look like, what's the throughput of the various ports and stuff like that. I think it's going to be an interesting problem to solve. Hopefully we get back there someday. It's pretty crazy not to be able to use the Suez. It's actually a very interesting kind of macro thing of just the United States Navy and its allies have, since World War II, kind of guaranteed freedom of navigation, and it's a big part of what's powered globalization. And if they're unable or unwilling to do that with some small group like the Houthis, it's pretty disconcerting for the broader picture of globalization. So hopefully, this is not the thing that dominates. But
as an industry, we all want a level playing field, but we all want safety of the same.
1,000%. I mean, it's just crazy. I don't know how I would do exactly what you're doing in those shoes. Is you got to prioritize safety of your team. Speaking of kind of barriers to trade or things that are getting more difficult, obviously there's tariffs. And this is going to be very, very interesting. Every day there seems to be some new development from the United States government, and then maybe retaliation from some of the trading parties. The one that really kind of surprised me and worried me is this, the fees on Chinese port calls for ships made in China. And if you have a single ship even in your order book somewhere, which is effectively all the container shipping lines, I was surprised to learn even Matson, which is a U.S. Jones Act carrier, has 3 Chinese ships in the fleet there, and therefore would be subject for all of their ships to these fees. The one that really struck me that I don't think a lot of people paid attention to in there is that there's a cap on U.S. exports have to go on a U.S. made ship. Up to, at least within 7 years, 15% of U.S. exports will have to travel on a ship that's made in America. And I don't know. I'm assuming you haven't bought any ships made in America because they just are not competitive these days. I think the cost of a small U.S. ship is $200 million, $300 million is the same as one of these mega ships that Korea, Japan, and China are producing. So I just that rule, I'm hoping it doesn't pass. I want to call it out here because our customers are listening, and the U.S. Trade Representative Office has asked for comment. And I don't think they care what Jeremy and I say because our businesses are, super tied to importing goods and shipping goods around the world. But they definitely care if you're a U.S. company out there and this is hitting your business. We want to make sure that that's super easy for you to let the trade representative know that things that make trade harder on American businesses are pretty difficult. And especially those of you who are manufacturing and exporting, we'll get you some nice instructions for how to let the trade representative know and hear your voice. We still do have a good process. Thankfully, they are listening, they're soliciting public comment. So you have until March 24th. So we have 2 more weeks to get that out there. But I don't know. I'll be curious to hear your thoughts. Like these port call fees are pretty tough. I mean, you're in a better position than a lot. I think less of your ships are made in China, but you still have Chinese made ships in the fleet. What's the latest there? Or how do you read this? Obviously, it's very hard to predict the U.S. government at this stage, but I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah, so I think we all recognize and understand that the Chinese have built up an incredibly strong position in shipbuilding globally, frankly, because they make a very good product on a very quick time delivery at a very competitive price. And all international economies around the world have struggled to keep up with Asia's shipbuilding capacity, particularly the Koreans, the Japanese, and the Chinese. I mean, even the UK. The UK used to be a very, very prominent shipbuilder. Very limited capability now. China is producing around about 2,800 ships a year for non-Chinese companies. I think the US is producing about 20 ships a year in its commercial yard. So
that's total. I mean, those are all mostly for American companies, presumably.
Yeah. So our frankly, the American companies of shipbuilding has just not been competitive for our side of the industry. So we have naturally built in Japanese and Korean and Chinese yards.
Yeah.
This new legislation it being proposed is really very significant impact on the supply chain and on cost of the supply chain. So quite rightly, many companies, including Flexport, including ONE, including the World Shipping Council, represents all of the container carriers. We are trying to explain to the regulators and administration the intended and unintended consequences if this was to happen. The costs are really, really significant. So, we make over 1,000 port calls a year in North America, and if we're going to get pinged for having some Chinese ships in our fleet outside of the USA, not in the USA, but outside of the USA, if we're going to get pinged for that, and we're going to get pinged potentially $1 or $2 million a port call, that's $1 to $2 to $3 billion on our bottom line in terms of extra cost, and that's just not economic.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
Yeah, so 2 things are going to happen, right? One is obviously it'll have to be a pass-through cost, and the second thing is that we'll all have to look at our networks and say, well, actually, can we still call at the same number of ports? And the concern I have for the industry is twofold. One is that a lot of America's smaller ports, it may no longer be economic to bring ships to those because the port cost diluted down by the number of boxes that we're handling there makes that uneconomic. And the second issue is that the freight rates are higher on the import side of the business into North America because that's the dominant head haul side of the business. The backhaul, which is the exports, US exports, which today we have a trade imbalance roughly about every 10 containers in. We used to get about 8 out. Now it's down to about 3 out. So we have this imbalance. Wow. But those export containers are already being heavily subsidized by the carriers on very low freight rates.
Yeah.
Now, if we have to put the pass through onto this, it basically is going to almost double the freight rates for many of the products that we're moving for US
exports. For the export side. Yeah, it's just like I get that when you say that math on the number of ships that we're producing, I see the problem that they see, right? I mean, I think American wants to be a military power, and there's all kinds of reasons why you want shipyards to be successful. But the second order effects of that are just really tough to see on the manufacturing sector.
Regulators are supposed to provide a level playing field, give us clarity around what the new regulation is, give us time to be able to react. There's going to be an element of carrot, there's going to be an element of stick.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, this is all stick, no carrot, because we can't go and build US ships today in America.
Yeah.
And it's going to take many, many years for that to change. Anyway, this would be overnight. So this implementation.
And I think if you're out there, we got a great audience out here listening, a lot of good American companies. They don't, like I said earlier, they don't really care what Jeremy has to say about this, the Trump administration, but they do care about you, American businesses. So make your voice heard. Let's I'll get you. We're sending out a notice to our Flexport customers this week on what the messaging is and how to send it. We saw a lot actually in the Trump first administration when they were passing Section 301 tariffs and they were putting new tariffs in, and then they would hear from an American manufacturer about how this new tariff was going to hurt their business. They were pretty responsive to that. They were putting exclusions in place. They were doing things. I actually don't think they want the second order effects, but it's hard. These things are really hard to model. It's a very complex system with a lot of moving pieces. The idea that, okay, you put a fee in per port call, and then the natural reaction is, if you go look at the service maps of any carrier, they're making 3 port calls on the West Coast, and they're going to naturally think, oh, like, hey, maybe I don't stop in that nice port that you have behind you of Seattle or here in Oakland. And Oakland isn't that important of a port on the import, but it's a major port for exports for California Central Valley, all the agriculture that's coming out of here, et cetera. So it's just super hard for a regulator to model these things. They're looking at a high-level problem. Hey, U.S. shipbuilding capacity, what can we do to level the playing field of China versus U.S.? But the second order effects are really tough. And then the predictability, like you said, like my big advice on the tariffs and stuff, I mean, again, nobody really cares what I have to say about tariffs, but I'm firmly anti-tariff. But my main thing is let's get it over with quickly so people can start to plan. And what should their supply chain look like? If you got a plan, let's roll it out quickly, because it's the changes every week that a lot of companies that I talk to feel a little bit of paralysis. They sort of get the message loud and clear that doing business with China is going to be harder. Tariffs are going to be higher. There might be other barriers coming down the pipeline. But it's once you have tariffs on Mexico, you have tariffs on Canada, it stops being clear that there's any safe haven against tariffs. And so, other than manufacturing in the United States, and maybe that's the core message, but as of right now, manufacturing in Vietnam, Malaysia, Cambodia, India, there's all these other countries that are so much more attractive from a labor cost. And we've seen this massive secular shift towards Southeast Asia, towards India for the last more than a decade. But it's very hard for a company to make those plans today. So hopefully we're in a period where, the administration's new, they're just getting their skis under them. But you'd like to think that there's a moment at which you can kind of get some stability and people can start to replan for the new normal.
Yeah. Pragmatic, predictable, clear regulation, legislation, then the whole global supply chain, the whole of North America's retailers, manufacturers, exporters can work to that. Yeah.
But anyways, I mean, nobody cares what we think anyways on those regards. No. So we'll say our piece. But I'm curious, talk about the Southeast Asia shift that you've seen and how there's been a lot of manufacturing. How much of that is evidence in the data and therefore in how you're responding to the fleet versus more media? I mean, trade with China still seems pretty strong. They're still making a lot of the best stuff in the world. But what have you seen and how have you guys responded to invest in new geographies?
So I would say that as ONE, and because of our Japanese roots and our Japanese shareholders, the Japanese have always invested and the government's always invested in the Southeast Asia economies. So we have many big Japanese clients, automotive, electronics, which have moved into Vietnam, Indonesia, Southeast Asia a long time ago. So we were kind of tuned into that market anyway. But when China came to the WTO in 2002, we saw just an incredible explosion, as we know, in the growth of China manufacturing, which has been, a global phenomenon overall. And so we saw the Trans-Pacific eastbound market. We saw the sourcing out of China getting up to around about 80% for many of the big BCOs, and that's really been tracking south since then. I would say probably now about, around about 55% of all cargo on the Transpac now is coming out of China. It used to be at 65, only 5 years ago.
Okay.
So this deleveraging on China, as you know. So where's it going? Yep, it's going Southeast Asia, it's particularly going to Vietnam and Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, and then India's coming into the mix. Korea's doing a bit better now. Japan's doing a bit better. So it's all about de-risking for the American BCO importers on China. What we're seeing though is, elsewhere in the world, like Latin America or Africa, they're doing more business with China now.
Yeah.
So what goes around comes around. So if people are reducing down their production coming out of Chinese factories, guess what? There'll be other people that will want more from China, and it kind of goes around. But
and the Chinese,
high.
I go to China several times a year, and the progress, I've been going there. I lived there for a couple of years, 20 years ago. So I've been watching that progress, sometimes up close and a lot from the distance. But the progress on Chinese autos in the last 2 years, even, I mean, it's just like they're making some minivans that are like Bentleys or something, and they only cost $50,000. Like, the world will want these cars. And they're gonna find a way to market. It's going to be very interesting to see. I've been having this idea, like, if the U.S. is not going to allow these cars, and Europe will likely put up more barriers to protect Europeans, and Japanese may have to do this to protect the Japanese car sector. But like, you're going to go to random country in Central Africa and find the locals are driving much better cars than the billionaires in the United States because they have access to these Chinese cars. So you will see trade grow with China and these other sectors. It's a response that Flexport, frankly, we've built a really strong presence in China, in part because I lived there and I can speak some Chinese, and I felt really comfortable operating in that market since the early, and we've followed our customers mostly. But we're responding, going, hey, we've opened up offices in 7 new countries in the last 2 years, feeling like, oh, okay, we need to be much stronger. We've got stronger, better, more talent in China than we do in other parts of the world. And that's part of our journey and evolution, is to feel like we're just as strong and follow our customers as they make that shift.
Yeah. I mean, I think to your point, what goes around comes around. Global supply chains will adapt. It's like water falling from a mountain coming down to the lake. It will find a way.
Yeah.
And so often a lot of what we're doing also is moving product out of China and moving somewhere in Southeast Asia, where it goes into a finally assembly room, and then it's coming back to the USA. So sometimes we're carrying the freight twice.
I know, exactly. I've noticed that, like, actually you might do more logistics now because of this whole thing. And it's not intuitive at all, right? You would think like, oh, we're going to ship less stuff. It's like, nope, we got to ship it from China, post-processing, ship it on. So I think you're going to see a lot of that type of behavior. And okay, maybe there's an increase in shipping there. I am so curious how you guys, you as an industry and asset heavy ocean carriers, but you at ONE as well, think about your assets have these 20, hopefully 30-year life cycles. You're making these big investments. You've got a pretty big order book. Everyone knows the world's really hard to forecast, 18 months from now. So there's some degree of like chutzpah that's required to run the company on some level, and long-term thinking. I think the Japanese are known for that. You've got good shareholders that have been in this business for 100 years. So there's a comfort level probably that maybe Wall Street investors don't necessarily have. But tell us a little bit about how you think about that. You're investing. You've got a pretty big order book. You want to be one of the big global carriers. Tell us how we should think about ONE's position over the next few years as the order book comes to fruition.
Yeah. So when we, I think first of all to set off, to say that I think the container shipping industry is still a growth industry as the global economies continues to expand, as we see populations expand. And still more products are being containerized today. So the container story growth, compound growth we've averaged 5% for the last 35 years. I think that's probably going to continue for at least another 1 or 2 decades. Right?
I like to point out, by the way, I've looked at data that goes further back, and you can say 4% annual growth going back to the Mongol invasions around 1200 AD. The human beings just want to trade with each other, and if you look at that long run graph of trade, World War II shows up as this little tiny little blip, like you barely noticed and that was about as disruptive as you could imagine. So we're going through some disruption right now. We've got governments that are imposing their will in certain ways, but like none of that compares, God willing, to anything like World War II. So I think you're right. I think that's a fair bet.
Yeah, it's a good industry. It's a good long-term play, and it has been consolidating. So the number of players is reducing down because the barriers to entry and the size and scale of the business have got so much bigger. The size of the investment. So when we order now, for a new U.S. East Coast sloop from Southeast Asia, we need at least 10 ships. There's at least $200 million each. That's $2 billion in terms of assets, and then you've got to order the containers as well, which is about another 500 million on top of that.
And that's just one loop that you're running. And if you go look at his service maps list that I was talking about earlier, wow, there's a lot of these things. So it's super capital intensive.
So we have to plan ahead. And I think, I think where the industry makes a mistake is when during the good times, we just order the ships, and during the bad times, we don't. Actually, what we try to do at ONE is a bit like our personal finance. There's cost averaging, just invest steadily and you'll get your average cost right. But it means that you've got a steady supply chain of ships coming off the production line. And also each year, the technology is slightly improving or enhancing, or some new green fuels or some other technologies coming through. So we try to do that. So we have a 10-year plan, very clear, very specific strategic plan for the next 10 years, lined out, looking at our trade growth. And that tells us how many ships we need to order over which years, how many containers, and also the container terminals are also a key part of this now. So we can't always rely on third-party containers or ports. We have to think increasingly more about having our own terminal footprints or gateway areas as well. And then there's all the tech, Ryan, as you know, the systems, the platform, the technology, the digitalization, the AI, that we have to continue to invest in very, very significantly.
I think you're going to see massive gains from this. I think the big industrials companies are going to be some of the major beneficiaries. There's this arms race in AI, TBD if any of those companies figure out how to make money, but they can certainly create a lot of value. And the ability to do planning. I mean, one of the use cases that we're using actually Google's machine learning for, but and I assume others will be just as competitive over time, is planning, okay, which container should go on which ship, trying to optimize transit time against costs, against the commitments that we've made to the carrier, what we call an MQC of like, hey, I've committed to this many volume. And so I can't just always choose the cheapest contract that I might have in the database. I got to go meet my commitments to the carriers. And that we saw that's saving us 2% and improving our transit time by up to 20% across a large enough pool of containers that, those are the kinds of efficiencies that you can't do when you're just a startup and you don't have a lot of volume. You need scale. And so it's going to be, I think this industry in general is going to be one of the big beneficiaries of AI, of just finding things to automate processes that have been really resistant. We've only been around close to 15 years and we've already started to say, oh, I thought we'd be way better at automating stuff, but it turns out there's a lot of edge cases. We're finding that AI can do these things. So I think we're just in the beginning of what's possible with tech. And ultimately it's like you're trying to earn better returns on your asset, less waste. And so it should be a big winner.
But the last part, I think, we talked about the ships, the containers, the terminals, the tech. I think the fifth one is people.
For sure.
And we still need people. We still need good people. We need good talent. And for both of us, I'm sure it's about attracting good talent to our companies, developing that talent, retaining that talent, and having a really good bench strength.
It's such an interesting industry. I think one of the things that's made Flexport successful is being able to show that, hey, this industry is not this old boring thing that it might look like from the outside. I mean, everybody knows the ships are cool and they look beautiful. No industry has better imagery, but that there's all this underlying stuff that's fascinating to learn how businesses are running, how the world economy works, super global. I mean, we're creating a leadership program right now to move talent into Southeast Asia and India and other parts of the world and show them, hey, do 2 years here. It might change your life. And certainly you'll learn a lot. And there's no better industry to learn, I think. But it's so hard, running this global business. I assume you've got meetings at all hours of day and night and coordinating and having people you trust to go to every corner of the earth. How many different countries do you have employees in these days?
120 countries
Oh
in the
my
world,
goodness.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So to your point, we are we're the servants of global trade. We're the pulse of trade. It's 24/7 business, so it's always on the go. But it's a fascinating industry, and it's never a dull day, is there? There's always some challenge, some development, some incident.
There's
We
something in
just
the news every single day that we have unique insight into that we can comment on or like be a example of, or maybe it's hurting us, maybe it's helping us. I mean, there's something every single day. I never take it for granted. The last thing, I know you've got to go, but I want to ask one last question. We've had this big reshuffle of alliances. You guys have come out here saying, hey, you have a new configuration, building towards same goal, which has always been on-time performance, quality, cost, something that you have been known for. What should we expect from the bit of a reshuffling that's taken place out there? What do you see that evolution of that alliance structure over the next few years? You said you have a 10-year plan. I don't know. You can plan the alliances that far out, but
yeah. So we have, we've gone from an industry model over the last 3-4 years of having 3 different consortia, groupings of carriers, to now effectively going to 4.
mm-hmm.
So if you took a look at the top 9 carriers, which basically control 85% of global trade, those 6 out of those 9 are having to disengage from their existing partnerships and switch over to new partnerships. So that's what's going on. And that process has happened basically since Chinese New Year, which was at the end of January. So during February, there's a lot of reshuffling going on. That's generally where we have a quieter period in terms of cargo demand. That's the rain shadow after Chinese New Year. The factory's still coming back. So we try to switch the ships around when the demand's lower. And now we're into, coming in now to mid-March. And so those networks are really sort of forming up. But what we've done with ONE is we have the Premier Alliance, which is ourselves and HMM and Yangming. And I think we've got off to a good start. We're running, as I say, 12 sailings a week on the Transpac at the moment. And of those 12, over the 5 voyages of March, so that's 60 potential voyages in March, we've got 2 blanks. So 97% of the network is in place and on its way, bringing imports to North America. And then those vessels will continue to cycle through. We're on track. We very much believe in these end-to-end transits and solutions as the Premier. And we also have, our own container terminals in Los Angeles and Oakland as well to try to provide that
and
product.
There's some elevated port congestion right now. Is that in part because there's all this reshuffling that's happening right now, or is that just a different phenomenon that's at play?
It's partly that. It's partly weather related. It's partly knock-on impacts of industrial action taking place in Europe, and that's all just plugging through. But I mean, Vancouver is really struggling at the moment in North America. That's a winter-related issue to do with the railroad velocity backing up into the terminal port areas. So that's a challenge at the moment. I think you and I, we were in Los Angeles, Long Beach only last week. I visited 3 of our terminals there. They've done a really good job handling the volume this year.
Yeah.
And then on the East Coast, we're still coming out of some of the stoppages and temporary actions we had around the ILA, but that hopefully will get smoother. The weather will hopefully get smoother. But we're still running container terminals in North America and elsewhere in the world at much higher utilizations than we did historically. So the buffer room for accommodating anything that's off window is getting tougher and tougher as an industry.
Interesting. Well, hey, we're out of time here, but this was a real pleasure. I could talk to you forever. I hope we get a chance to see you in person again soon, but great to get other folks a chance to listen in and learn from you mostly. I mean, it's such a great career, a great experience, of fascinating perch that you have. I have to say again, congratulations on the courage to paint those boats that beautiful magenta pink, magenta, not pink, magenta. Very bold, very excellent branding. Everyone in my family approves. My daughters those are the ones they notice. We can see the bay from our house, and they always notice the ONE ships coming in.
Great. Well, thanks, Ryan. Thank you so much. Thank you for all Flexport's cooperation as well with ONE over the years. And to all of our customers, and all of everybody in the industry, let's hope that 225 is a more predictable, a safer, and a easier year to do business. It's got off to a bit of a challenge, but that's the job of all of us to try to straighten this out and try and make this and work with the regulators to come up with something pragmatic and realistic.
Yeah, it makes our jobs more important as the business gets harder. It's more obvious what we can do to help our customers get through it all. So great. That's a great place to finish. So thank you so much. And we'll talk to you very soon.
Thanks, Ryan.